as an industry as a whole, we have an organic growth problem. People are struggling to grow. They're growing through M&A, but that's different than boots on the ground, getting new clients. I think that that's brought marketing up to be an attention and focus point of saying, okay, what we've done in the past isn't working. What got you here won't get you there. How do we actually take it to the next level?
Welcome back to another episode of Marketing Matchup. Today, I am excited, pumped, enthused. Pick your adjective. This should be a great one. We've got Stacey McKinnon, who's the Chief Marketing Officer, amongst other things, at Morton Wealth out in California, and Matt Seitz, who's a Partner and Chief Marketing Officer at Prosperity Capital out in Ohio. The two of you, unlike some of my matchups, actually have run into each other before, so this should be a fun episode here. Maybe a little student-teacher dynamics, given your past with the Phil Paolini's efforts of the G2 Academy. So, hey, two of you, thank you so much for joining the program. We're excited to have you. So let's set the table here for a second. So here we are. It's mid-2026 summertime. We have a lot going on here in the world of RIA marketing. I think it's inescapable. A few things, if you haven't been paying attention the last year and a half, that populate almost every advisor conference. You see some topic around marketing and organic growth. You see stats coming out, pointing at a number of firms underwhelming, and everyone wants to learn what the winners are doing. So that's been pervasive. We're starting to see more and more people like you with C-level titles in the marketing realm. That's also been a big one. And inescapable in all this is the fact that the introduction of AI has really turned things on its head in the industry, specifically in the world of marketing. So we're going to cover a lot of that ground a little bit here with both of you today, but excited to have you join the show. And let's kick it off here. So Stacey, we'll let you go first. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to your current role.
Oh, it's a non-traditional story at the least. So about 12 years ago, I was working as a wedding planner and a Pilates instructor, which is not the same as financial services. And I had a client at the Pilates studio who had been coming for about a year. And she came up to me after class one day and said, "Hey, I own this wealth management firm. I really like the way you teach Pilates classes. Will you come join my firm?" And I was like, that is not the same thing. Those are not the same thing. And she tried to convince me eventually that helping people with their health is similar to helping people with their wealth. And so I left the world of fitness behind and I joined the firm, started an operations role. But I will tell you that immediately I took on the marketing role. Within 3 months of working there, I went in and I was like, this website is a glorified Word doc. We are going to fix this. Everybody's going to use the same fonts, and tried to just create some type of consistency while I was also studying to become an advisor. So fast forward a few years, I got my CFP. I had the opportunity to take the advisory track, and they came to me and said, would you rather be an advisor or be the COO and CMO? And so I chose to be in a leadership role in a firm as opposed to take the advisory track. And it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. It's been so much fun. Every day is new. I get to learn so much. And so I really, really enjoyed that. And like you mentioned in the introduction, I'm so thrilled with how marketing has evolved and increased over time. To be honest with you, I'm trying to give away my COO role so I could just do the CMO role, because it is really exciting to be in the growth trajectory where we are today.
Stacey, that's a great background. I mean, for someone who's teaching Pilates, and maybe you probably knew the art of cross-selling then, because you
That's true.
get these wedding customers thinking, how do I get in shape? Go to your Pilates classes. And so, and I think you knew how to connect the dots then. And so, Matt, I'm not sure if you have the same fitness to finance.
I was going to say, I do not have that kind of colorful past like that. So,
so tell us about you, Matt. How'd you land in the CMO function?
Yeah. So going all the way back, I started my career actually in marketing, but it was for professional services marketing for a leadership training company, which I found extremely helpful now in my career, because I learned so much just about the subject matter of what we did then from a people standpoint, from the teams that I work with now, the people that I get to touch and develop internally and work with, externally from the standpoint of who we market to and work with from a business development standpoint. So from the personal development that I had from that first workplace that I had, moving on and going to an accounting, financial services. So that's when I first got into that RIA space and business advisory company. And as part of those business advisory, we had a marketing agency that was attached to that. So I was internal for the marketing team, but also serviced clients through that marketing agency. And that part is what led to where I am today at Prosperity Capital Advisors. So coming in here, and when I was brought over here, they said, all right, we need to do some work to shore up our internal brand here, but eventually want to build out a marketing function and marketing agency to service the financial advisors that we have, because we know we have to build the marketing function that can help us reach more individuals and families.
Well, and I think you're both realizing something where, whether it's on purpose, part of a plan, or by accident, firms like yours need the leadership. And I think you're only beginning to scratch the surface in terms of the kinds of things that can get done. And, Matt, I'll pick on you here for a second. I saw you were a finalist for this year's CMO of the Year category with the Wealthies. And I think both of you have gotten some recognition from the luminaries as well in your career. I think Stacey might have been, I don't know, right after the pandemic. I remember seeing something for you in that category. And I point these things out because it's awesome to see the industry giving awards out to marketers as a separate category, right? So that, which leads me into this question, and Matt, you can go first here. Give us a sense of the state of wealth management marketing today. Like, how would you describe the situation in terms of how you see your role, what you think the sense of expectations are around marketing in the RIA world?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent place to start, because I think that it's evolving so fast that I think we, especially as the leaders of our teams, need to be leading the charge with the evolution of this, and being able to tie in with the things. Obviously, we know we're going to be covering AI, because that's the leading one of how do we tie this in into what we're doing every day, but tie into the personalization side, because we know from the consumer standpoint, we have to be more efficient and work smarter, not harder. We all hear that. But from the consumers, the people that we're working with, they want to know they're not working with robots. They're not interacting that when there's things that they want to know. They want to know that they can go to a website and things like that and get answers, with the click of a button. But at the same time, there are certain things where they know that they can communicate with humans and have that personal touch. So it's from the marketing standpoint, how can we communicate smarter and help the advisors and those around us leverage these tools to communicate more effectively, make things more seamless, but do that in a way that leverage their time smarter to make a human connection. And I think that's the way that we try to put it the best internally, of how do we use these things to still make the human connection, to use the tools, but keep the personal side, because that's what we can't lose sight of, so that it's not just the automation, just the AI, things like that.
And Matt, I think it's actually a great tee up for Stacey here, talking about the personal side, because I know it's Stacey mentioned a little bit along those track in our notes. Stacey, how would you characterize the state of RIA or wealth management marketing, given all that we've talked about so far, and also again using the fact that there's now awards for your category? How would you describe it?
Well, it's so interesting to see how it's evolved and changed. And I oftentimes talk about the evolution of the COO role, which I think was the C-suite role that evolved right before the CMO role evolved. And remember in 2017, I spoke at my first conference, and I looked out at the audience, and afterwards people came up to me and they said, how do you have a voice at the table? How do you get to the leadership table? And I asked what their title was, and they all were COOs, but they were being treated like glorified office managers. They didn't have a voice. They weren't involved in strategy. They weren't there. Fast forward 5 years from that conference in the COVID era, and everyone had a COO, and all those COOs were at a table. I think the same thing's happening in marketing. 5 years ago, there was almost no CMOs. And if there were, we all gathered together as a small cohort of 10 and tried to get best practices from one another. Fast forward to today, almost every firm that I know that is growing has a CMO, and that CMO is at the table. And I think that that's been an incredible evolution in the industry. And it stems from the fact that as an industry as a whole, we have an organic growth problem. People are struggling to grow. They're growing through M&A, but that's different than boots on the ground, getting new clients and growing. When I see the latest statistics on this, I think it's 2 to 3% net organic growth rates in a lot of different firms. And I think that that's brought marketing up to be an attention and focus point of saying, okay, what we've done in the past isn't working. It's kind of that like what got you here won't get you there. How do we actually take it to the next level? And we've done that where we've been able to maintain closer to 5 to 7% organic growth rate, net organic growth rates through supporting our advisors in growing. So when we think about growing our firm, we put a lot of energy, a lot of money, a lot of resources towards helping our advisors grow, as opposed to just doing it at the firm brand level only. We are still working at the firm brand level, but I think we've just taken a little bit more of like a grassroots boots on the ground strategy, and that's worked really well for us. And I know that a lot of different marketing agencies and firms are looking at advisor brands and asking, okay, how many resources should we put here versus cultivating like a cold lead pipeline at the firm level? And so that's been really interesting to see the evolution of that too.
Well, and I think you're talking about something that we should get into at this point. We're talking about making the brand more personal. You're really thinking about the audience, right? So I'd like the two of you dive in here for a second for the benefit of our audience here. Share a little bit with how you contextualize your marketing audience. Are you spending more time in your marketing mix focused on the B2B, the B2C? And tell us how those two pieces fit together generally in terms of what you're doing from a marketing standpoint. I know, Matt, your firm has been consolidating 7 brands under one go-to-market, right? So in a lot of ways, there's some constituent building with the advisors, right? And making sure they're on board. But at the same time, it also means they have a different pathway in terms of how they present themselves to their customers. So maybe I'll start with you, Matt. Like, how do you balance those two? Like, how would you characterize your current audience in terms of balancing the marketing push, prosperity? And then I'd love to hear Stacey's take on that question as well. Go ahead, Matt.
Sure. Yeah. And I'll start with what you mentioned just to give context to the listeners or viewers. Yeah, we're having a unique year for a merger that we're going through, bringing 7 different brands together at one time, which is quite a feat, and making for an interesting year and a fun year, honestly. From a marketing standpoint, you're always looking for a new challenge to go through, and it's been fun from that standpoint. But coming up with the brand messaging and coming up with the audience that you're going after, because it's the number one rule that we know your audience. Well, when you're bringing those different audiences together, and I think this is where you were going, Joe, and if it's not, please correct me, is like we have our hierarching audience of who we know we're targeting as a firm, that who we want to speak with or who we can work with. But we have several different segments within it and niches that we work with. And that's what we're trying to dive into as our marketing team. That we have different, I'll say, leaders within our marketing team that are working with the different advisory segments to say, this is how we're going to go out and talk to the federal employees that we want to work with. This is how we're going to go talk to our women's niche. This is how we're going to go talk to the business owners. And so making sure that we talk to those niches individually underneath our overall brand arch. So it still has to fit our overall brand standards of who we work with and who is the prosperity brand. But the more targeted that we can speak to so that they know once they're within that niche that we know who they are. We know what they're living every day. We know the pain points they're going through, and we know how to see them through that, because those are the type of clients that we work with within that segment, or the advisors that are within that segment, so that we can have that relationship with them long term as we're working with them.
And that's good perspective. And I think, Matt, obviously you're wrestling with a lot when you're trying to sort of serve two masters, particularly at this juncture of the firm's evolution. Stacey, your firm's a little different because, as far as I can see, Morton's always been one brand. I mean, maybe you modified your brand a couple of years ago, but generally speaking. So how does that take shape in terms of your positioning, your audience?
Yeah, Matt, first of all, I was feeling empathetic to you when you said 7 brands into one. That is a lot. I'll give you some context of how I think about marketing and how it's changing. So I'm a big fan of looking at like human psychology and human behavior, and how human psychology and human behavior is changing. And one of the things that's evolved over the last few years is our attention spans are declining significantly.
What was that? Okay.
All right. Yep, there you go. It used to be 12 seconds, and then it was 5, and I think it's down to 2, which is basically like the scroll of a thumb, right? That's our attention spans. And so then the question becomes, when you tackle marketing strategy, how do you capture attention? And I think that that's been a core principle in terms of how we decide on how we're going to go out into the marketplace. The other thing that happened was about 10 years ago in the industry, all of the conferences were up on stage talking about how clients have to be clients of the firm. Clients of the firm, clients of the firm. You don't want an advisor to leave with their books, that they have to be clients of the firm. Well, I think that that's a very good strategy to market to existing clients in terms of, being proud that they're with you as a company. But I actually think that prospecting is easier when it's prospecting to the advisor versus prospecting to the firm. I think people make connection points with people easier than they make connection points with a brand. And so we've really separated those two things. We have our marketing strategy that's helping our advisors build connections and grab attention that way. And then we have our marketing strategy that's generally when they're clients of the firm. Now, how do we keep them and make sure that they feel like they're clients of the firm? But it's prospects of the advisors, clients of the firm. So really kind of like separating those two things out has been really important to us. And so then as we think through that, we ask the question of like, how do you grab attention? And so most of our strategies focus on what I would call frequency of touch. If I have an advisor and I'm running their brand, that advisor goes out and they network at their local networking group once a month. And then I post 4 times a month for them on LinkedIn. So I'm getting 5 touches a month for every COI that my advisor is generating. And that's actually really where our growth has come from. So it's not about social media. It's not about LinkedIn. It's really about grabbing attention through a frequency of touch strategy where we can actually make sure that our advisors are always known. And then when it comes to the actual marketing, we know that people buy on emotion and justify with fact. So a lot of our marketing strategy when it comes to making those posts tend to be a little bit more oriented towards like making the other person feel something when they're reading whatever you did, which includes, by the way, personal posts too. And so that's been just a little different take that we've had on how we're approaching. Again, it is a little more grassroots, right? It's a little bit more one-on-one, but it's been really nice to see the growth of our advisors' books and the new client acquisition through that strategy.
And Stacey, I actually find a lot of it's really compelling when you talk about clients of the firm, prospects of the advisor.
Mm-hmm.
I once characterized the sort of the bifurcation there a little differently, where when you look at the firm, I always talk about you want to build credibility with the firm, but trust with the advisor, right?
Yeah.
Because it's directionally the same emotion or feeling, but it's what you're looking for in that contact. And I think it drives deeper at something else, right? So here you are in a business where the more money that plows in from private equity, bigger firms getting to, enterprise firms going, you have creative planning, which is almost $1 trillion in total assets, think like these huge
Yeah.
firms, right? I don't have the numbers right, but you know what I'm saying there in terms of the size. And you start thinking, wow, these are big Goliath organizations. These independent RIAs have become what they ran away from at the wirehouse in terms of size and scale in some
Yes.
cases. And so you have all these things going on, but at the same time, fundamentally, the marketing doesn't change. You're
Mhm.
asking someone, whether they have $1 million, 10 million, $100 million, to trust your firm to do the right thing with their money. And that's a very personal thing. And which blows me away. And I'd love to hear what you and Matt have to say on this, with the idea of being, all right, so now if we're all in agreement that trust, that personal connection, the empathy is important, how do you go about starting to tell your story, building that brand visibility, whether the advisor or the firm level, where that is at the centerpiece of what we're doing? Stacey, I'll let you start with this question because I know you had some comments on that in your notes. But how do you go about building your marketing to address that?
So we know that like the most common way that any RIA grows is through client referrals. And one of the things that I think most people miss is that people meet you online before they meet you in person. So whoever they're meeting online is where the trust building process starts. Because what happens is they go to dinner with a friend and the friend says, "Hey, I'm looking for an advisor." And they say, "Hey, here's my advisor's name." And they go home and they're laying in bed at night. And the first thing they do is Google you. And so one of the things that I do actually in the G2 leadership program when I'm teaching a course on marketing is I make everyone in the room Google themselves and see what comes up. Because that is where trust building starts. In that Google moment, we call it a meet cute in TV and movies. It's like when the couple meets or whatever, and it starts the like love story. That's the meet cute, right? So this Google moment. So then the question for us becomes like, what is the Google moment for each of our advisors? And are we curating that story for them even before somebody's walked in the door? So one of the, I think, best strategies we've done is a weekly podcast that I rotate through all of my advisors. And it's not the podcast itself that drives leads. It's actually how we utilize it in multiple ways. So we do the podcast, but then we take the transcript and we turn it into an AEO optimized blog post. Then we take that in addition to the video and text marketing, and then I use that for each of my advisor brands. So any advisor, Morton, that you get introduced to, if you Google them, there's going to be probably 5 to, in some cases, 50 different videos you can watch on different topics, optimized for different elements of investing or financial planning. And so the goal with this is that we're not only hitting on the advisor or the firm level AEO strategy, the firm level brand, which I think is very important to build trust, but we're also helping our advisors build personal brands at the same exact time. I've doubled that with also being really sensitive to what our visual communication looks like. So we just did a full new color change at Morton, because as the world gets busier and louder, our brand needed to get like more comforting and serene and like be not the loudest thing in a client's life. And so there's all of these kind of subliminal messaging things that happen around the trust building process. But I personally believe that a marketing team's duty is to make sure that when people meet you online, that is who you want them to meet, right? And that's been, I think, core to how we've approached our strategy over the last few years.
And Matt, how would you respond to what Stacey shared and to the question of making marketing more personal in this day and age?
Yeah, and funny enough, it starts out very similar because we say the same thing to a lot of our advisors of, when anyone is hearing about you through referrals, they're going to go on and they're going to either they're going to Google you, go to your website, or look for your social media. So let's start with those three. Is your website in order? Is your Google business profile in order? Are your social media accounts in order? So let's make sure that those three are optimized to speak to the target audience that you are trying to attract, because that's the key, is the target audience you're trying to attract. So every advisor is different that we're working with. If you're trying to attract the ultra high net worth 5 million plus, that's going to be different than the 500,000. So making sure that we optimize it for that, because it, as Stacey was saying, this day and age, people want to work with an advisor. It's not just the trust. I'd say it's know, like, and trust. It's that know, like, trust factor. And people in general are doing more and more research up front. I think Stacey mentioned that in her answer earlier. They're doing a lot of that. They're Googling, they're using AI, they're doing all that up front. So how can we, as marketers, provide more information in our content up front through, podcasts like this and everything up front, so that they can be more educated up front, but that we can build not only the content that they're looking for, but that reputation management. That's why we believe, shameless plug, working with the Gregory team to make sure that we build the credibility for a lot of our advisors, and on a serious note, that's why we do that. We want to make sure that they have that reputation management. It's why we, just like Stacey mentioned with her team, we put a lot of those, the case studies, we call them the success stories of the clients that we work with out there. People want to see, okay, they've worked with people that have been through a similar situation for me, and I can see myself in that story. And so showcasing those in the success stories, in the blogs, in the podcasts. So working those into the content either that we have there or through the sales process collateral that we have there. And so we try to work all that in and establish that know, like, trust factor, so that when we're then trying to drive, we're big on doing live events then is like the next step in our process. So that then when we're driving to, and I think I'm only going there because I think this kind of still answers the question, the next step in the process, then when we're getting them into the funnel, when they show up there, they're seeing those advisors, but we then are trying to invite some of those clients. So they're like, okay, I recognize them from that success story. And they're seeing that next step of, okay, I recognize them from that blog or from that podcast. And they're, that client then is recommending us while they're seeing us at that event and making that in. The other thing I'll say, and this actually goes back to the last question, because I very much believe in what Stacey said to answer that, the social media and posting on the advisor's behalf. We've actually adjusted our social media strategy in the last couple of years to do exactly that. It's not just posting from the firm account anymore, of strategically what are we posting from the firm account versus what's getting posted from individuals, because that trust factor from individual advisors or just strategically some of the leaders within our organization, like ourselves, of we have a trust factor that's attached to the title sometimes, or to us for the amount of times that we're out there posting and developing a reputation ourselves. So an individual posting versus just the organization, the engagement level on individuals posting just blows away what we'll have from an organization standpoint. So I would encourage, anyone else tuning in to look at that as well, because that's made a big difference in our engagement levels, as well as working in posts from individuals versus just from the work accounts.
I want to
Well,
highlight one thing
go
you
ahead,
said
Stacey.
too. Just I think that there has been a change in the marketing strategy where advisory and marketing work side by side, which I think is what you just shared, Matt, where I would say even 3 years ago, you had like a marketing department that was supposed to generate leads and advisors that were supposed to grow. And those two like didn't talk to each other that much. I think in the last year, I've heard in all of my CMO study groups as well, this concept of like, how do we actually integrate the growth strategy to be both marketing and advisory? Because I think that, to your point, Matt, when they work together, I think that's when you actually maximize the ROI. And I'm not sure that like the separate channels have been as successful.
Well, and it's one of the things when you start talking about some of these fundamentals that you both touched on here in terms of, you talk about marketing and advisors working together. Fundamentally, marketing again builds credibility, advisors build trust, going back to that paradigm we talked about before. I also think that we're, as much as digital marketing and other more what I'll call programmatic approaches to building businesses have come into vogue and they're very relevant, we're still a referral business because and what I mean by that is sometimes agents AI create referrals for us because they feel like you are recommended by Chat or Gemini or Perplexity. And although it's not the same as a good friend of yours that you've been hanging out with through church or the country club, whatever, saying that, it's still a point of reference and they'll investigate you further as a result. I would also say that because of these tools, because of the level of intelligence you can gather through search, both, old school and AI search, that people you're talking to are probably a lot closer to decision making than they would if they came in cold, uh,
Hmm.
filled out a form on your website. I need help with my retirement planning. Right? It's a different preparedness or mindset coming in. And so I say that because it sets up where I want to go to next. Right? So marketing, as you said, Stacy, was once upon a time sort of a separate function. Sort of, it was there for like the general purpose of the firm's visibility or recognition. Now
Hmm.
it has become more closely aligned with sales and new business. But I want to ask you both: how would you characterize the biggest pressure points for marketing leadership and marketing for wealth management firms today, based upon how the puck has moved? Matt, I don't know if you want to take that hot one first, but what's the biggest pressure points there are?
Um, yeah. I mean, I think the pressure point is kind of what Stacey was saying too. Is as they work together, I think there's just more pressure to prove the ROI. Um, but I think it's a good pressure. I think we should want to tie the two together because it it breaks down the silo of, marketing's over here. In some firms, they have like a business development or sales, and there's still the financial advisory lane. So I mean, you could have three different lanes there, and not just marketing and financial advisory. But trying to meld the two together, there's more like, let's get the what is the exact ROI, and So that's not just, so I'm trying to choose my words carefully there, because there's even an evolution within there. It went from like, we just need to generate leads to quality leads to what's your cost per acquisition. And now it's the like, what's the ROI on this? So marketing needs to be paying attention to what's happening to these leads all the way through the pipeline. And like, I'll speak from personal experience, like it became difficult for a while of like, hey, I can't tell what's going on all the way through the flight. You lose sight of that. And to some degree, like you want to maintain control of that, but you're passing the baton over. So Stacey mentioned, as you start to integrate with another lane and you have more discussion and more dialogue with other lanes and with advisors in those lanes, it helps with that. So as if you're going to be held responsible for that ROI of your efforts, you want to have more dialogue and involvement with those advisors, because you want to know what's going on down the line, because I want to know from those advisors what's working and not working with these prospects that we're passing down the pipeline. Like my team might think these are great leads, but they're saying, yeah, but they're all stalling out at this point because XYZ. Okay, then we need to tweak our messaging and not qualifying them for this reason. So I would say it's definitely the ROI is the factor, but I think the feedback loop is the like byproduct of that, which I think is making this even better, and I think more interesting, an interesting part of the marketing function.
Well, Matt, I think you're spot on that obviously the need to demonstrate ROI, because firms are investing more in marketing than they have been before. And so obviously if you're a firm principal, whether you're backed by an outside party P or just the founding team is the owners, they want to see bang for their buck when they're investing there. And so Stacey, I'll kick it to you and I'll embellish the question a little further. As a firm that has gone down the organic growth track only, unlike a lot of firms where they sprinkled in advisory recruitment or deal making as part of the spike, the growth cocktail. How would you characterize the pressure on CMOs like yourself to fuel the engine? Would you say that it's more or less than it's been, say, when you took over the reins 5 or 6 years ago?
I feel like actually bad saying this because I don't have really any pressure because we measure ROI and growth of the firm. Like I'm not trying to do attribution rate on just marketing activities because, okay, a client, somebody heard about us, they Googled us, they watched a podcast video, they liked an advisor in the podcast video, they came to meet with that advisor after watching the podcast video. None of that went through the marketing funnel at all. They just reached out to that person directly. So who gets credit? Does marketing get credit for producing a podcast? Does the advisor get credit for being on the podcast? Does the advisor get credit for closing that? Like these things are so integrated that from my vantage point and my point of view, like if we as a firm are hitting that 5 to 7% net organic growth rate, I kind of don't care. And I know that that's maybe a bold statement to make. And I maybe have the blessing of a firm that really believes in our marketing team and our marketing strategy. But I also will tell you that there's elements of that make sense to me. So I remember this was 2 years ago, we had a partner meeting and we all had to go around the table and say the thing we were most excited about at the firm. And we have 12 partners. And 10 of the 12 literally said the thing they were most excited about at the firm was our marketing. Like that was the thing that they were stoked about. And I started thinking through, like, I wonder why that is. But then I thought about how we've been running their brands. They've been growing. They get business development bonuses because they've been growing. And so we directly are helping them and their paycheck and all of the things that they do and the income they bring home. And so from my vantage point, I think that's why one of the reasons we've chosen to like double down on our advisor brand marketing strategy, because I do think that there's an element of that gives us flexibility and freedom to test, to drive new ideas, to launch a podcast and just see what happens, because we just fundamentally don't have significant pressure on what is the ROI. When my CEO and I talk about this, the question we ask is like, what are we testing and how will we know if what we're testing is working? And so it's a little bit more of like an experimental test strategy. And then if the results are there, I think we're happy with that. And I know that there's a lot of bigger firms, especially ones owned by PE, that would not like that answer from me. But there's an element of it where if we put too many strict guidelines on ROI, people will quit too soon before they finish testing, and they won't even know what they could have achieved.
So that's one we want to timestamp here, Eric. So people quit too soon before done testing. I think it's really important because the shelf life required for certain things to mature and actually settle in. I mean, for example, if you have an organization that coming from the land of PR and communications, if you have an organization that has never taken the time to think about what they want to say out there on a high level and immerse their not just their leadership team but their key advisors in that storytelling, and you're asking that team to be able to work with either your internal marketing team or external agency to be able to have a fully executed PR campaign in 2-3 months. It's not happening, right? Just the same with testing out SEO or AEO strategies. You're going to get your initial batch of intel in the first quarter. You're not going to have your answers, your outcomes then, right? So I'm so glad you said that, because the frame of reference and the time on the shelf is frankly a lot of times where things get derailed because not enough time to gestate. So, Stacey, since you don't have any pressure at all, it's amazing. Let me ask you about this. Let's talk about opportunity. If you think about, what do you think the biggest opportunity or most overlooked item in the marketing mix is out there for the typical wealth management firm today? Is there any specific area you say, hey, I think based on my conversations with peers or what we're doing that people are overlooking the value of?
Well, maybe I'll hit on what I think one of the biggest threat is in our industry, which then kind of comes into opportunity, right? One of the things that we're not really talking about when it comes to AI is how humans are going to make decisions in the future. So just for a second, fast forward 5 years for me, and every company that people work with or for is using Copilot or Claude or Chat or something in their everyday work. And so they start using it in their work, and then they say, oh, I need a new exterminator for my house. And then they use it for that. And then they use it for ordering something else. And then all of a sudden humans adapt to, I have a question, I'm going to go to my AI first, because that's how they are like behaviorally operating, right? This is new for all of us. So there's plenty of like AI naysayers who have never used Claude. In marketing, most of us have, but like there's some naysayers, right? So one of the threats I think I see to the industry is like, what happens in 5 years where before you ask a friend for an advisor, you go to Claude or Chat or Copilot. And then the question becomes for all of us marketers, how are we going to be there when they ask that question, right? And I think that the biggest opportunity today is actually optimizing your content and AEO strategy so that you are there at that inflection point. Because the other challenge I'm faced with, and I think this is a little different than the robo-advisor competition from 5 years ago, but Claude and Chat just came out with their new financial advisor abilities. Like they're marketing heavily that, hey, use me as your financial advisor. And so we have these tools that are marketing against us, but they're also the tool that people are going to search for. And, for somebody who does want to hire an advisor, they're going to find us there. I think that we have to take that more seriously than we currently are taking it. I think that the threat to organic growth in our industry as a whole, people are talking about how do I AI ops efficiencies and note taking. They're not seeing necessarily that human behavior is going to change over the next 5 years. And how do you make sure that people make the choice to hire an advisor versus hire a bot, essentially? And so that's something that's just really top of mind for me that we're working really hard on over here.
And how would you? I mean, I'd love to get Matt's reaction to that, because that's a juicy one, Stacey. Like, Matt, do you see the marketing around or overcoming the AI bot as the alternative to an advisor? Is that something you see as a threat in the marketing mix?
Yeah, I mean, I do see that happening, and I've seen a shift in even how a lot of the the AI channels are even handling some of this, because even going back to the end of last year, we were seeing a lot of even our own clients of the firm come back to us and saying like, hey, we're trying to do some of this on our own, even that we're working with us, saying, hey, we're going to try and do some of our planning and tax planning and whatnot through ChatGPT, Claude, things like that. They were coming to our advisor. Our advisor going, what are you doing? This is it. And it was hallucinating a lot back then. But consumers don't know, to Stacey's point, consumers don't know any better. So they were trying to do this and they were believing everything that it was saying. And even fast forward 6 months or so, we are seeing actually the opposite now. We're seeing a lot of people reach out. We just had it happen twice last week. We got referrals from one from Gemini and one from Claude, from prospects that reach out and said they were trying to do it themselves. And it eventually got so complex that it said, this is too complex for us. We recommend you reach out to an advisor. Would you like us to recommend one? They said yes. And then we popped up due to some of the things that I mentioned earlier. So I think that some of the ownership groups of some of these AI softwares are potentially worried about hallucinations and giving wrong informations and lawsuits and whatnot. And they're coding in some guardrails to say, hey, we can't give bad tax information, bad financial information. Like, we can take this so far and then say, okay, it's time to send to a professional. And that's why we have to be ready, to be the ones that are recommended, be the ones that are getting our advisors out there that are working there and kind of meeting them with the right content and getting ready for that.
Yeah, I think that's the point. One of the points I was trying to make is like, we have to be AEO ready as marketers, because I think this is coming and they're just getting better and better. I'll just give you a quick example. I did a podcast episode last week on advisor versus ChatGPT, where I had my team just surprise myself and one of my partners with the top five questions that people asked Chat. And so they asked us, and then we had to answer it, and we didn't know what the question was in advance. And then we had Chat answer it right after. And so basically we read those two and we compared and contrasted our answers to Chat. Then we went ahead and uploaded a AI optimized transcript where we did FAQs on how we answered it. We searched in Chat a week later, the same exact question, and it had all of our answers, and it didn't before. So AI is using essentially any type of AEO optimized content to produce the answer that people are asking. And so two things on that. One, it's getting better and better, because the more all of us marketers AEO optimize, the better it's going to be. It's going to read our voice.
Instantaneous. Yeah.
We're almost like, kicking ourselves in the foot or whatever it is with that. But then the second, to your point, is like, as soon as it runs out of horsepower, you want to be the one that it recommends, and especially in like niche contexts. And so I just think that this whole world of like how humans are going to change, we have to make sure that we keep up with that from a marketing strategy standpoint.
Well, think about it this way, right? The best marketing plans, the ones that are most likely to reap the rewards you want from a business development growth standpoint, are the ones that marry strong IQ with EQ, right? Like the intelligence you might get from a bot. The EQ piece, frankly, comes from human empathy, the connection point, knowing what really matters. I mean, I'm sure within the halls of Morton Wealth or Prosperity, there's an advisor once upon a time that answered the question, hey, I'm 64. Should I pay off my retirement, my mortgage in retirement? And the answer for one client is like, absolutely. You're going to sleep better at night. You're not going to worry about it. Another one's going to be like, no, you need to be able to use some of the tax advantages of paying your mortgage, whatever, right? And you have two different answers to the same thing. It comes down to that human piece, knowing the client, understanding those things, right? And so this is why it goes back to the other thing I want to get to. So Stacey said in her notes that she's a story brand enthusiast. She's not the first one. If you go back to Mindy Mackey's episode with us in last season, she's also another story brand enthusiast. And one of the things I really like about that approach to marketing today in this age of AEO and things like that is that the best AEO content, the best marketing, the most empathetic connections come from how does someone feel about how they arrive at your service, right? What do they see themselves in what you're doing? Are you able to connect with them on an emotional level? So when they're asking a question that might be of what I'll call dollar and cents nature, do you connect with the underlying emotion and are you able to build that narrative, that gap that's bridge the gap between your story and theirs a bit? And I think more and more, Stacey, again, to steal from your notes, you set up with the advisor as hero. I think more and more that advisor-client relationship and what happens in that relationship should be the hero, right? The magic of working together, not just, yes, your client's the hero, the advisor's the hero in terms of their roles and less so the brand. But I think you start thinking in those terms. We need to, as marketers, be able to point that arrow more towards those things that you bridge the gap between, all right, the services, the credentials you provide, and the emotions and the underlying issues you're solving for. And so I say that where you think, all right, now you know how I stand on that. When you think about how it applies to prosperity or Morton, when you think about that, how do you engage your advisors? Do you spend any time teaching them or reinforcing with them why you spend more time on the relationship and the emotional piece? I mean, Matt, I know that you have advisors all over the country. Is that something that comes up when you talk to your advisors, like knowing full well that empathy and that connection, that relationship might be the currency between okay growth and explosive growth?
Yeah, and it's something that, especially when we get all of our, being spread out all over, and I'm sure you're the same way, Stacey, but when we do have our events where we get them all together, that's when we try to do our professional development with them to focus on those kind of like sales skills, soft skills training, to focus on that empathy side and bringing it back to the individual. So those are the times when we are trying to bring in that story brand. Funny enough, we actually brought in a story brand consultant 2 years ago to one of our events
Great.
to try and bring that back to them. I think it was a little lost because I think everyone was so worried about like, how do we work it into the collateral and everything? It's like, well, all right, let's not forget, like, how do you bring it into your meetings? How do you bring it into how you're delivering this in the meetings? And I think that's more what you're saying. Um, that's kind of built into our process as well. Like that is the one standard that we have that I love. Like at Prosperity, all of our advisors, regardless of where they're at, follow the bucket plan process. And so everyone is following that through. Everyone has the same scripts. Now, when I say scripts, I mean they have the scripts, but obviously that dialogue that they're having is individual. We set it out that in that first meeting, the way that we word it is you don't move forward with the process until they hug you with their eyes. And that's the way we word it in terms of like building that rapport with them. We want to make sure that from an empathy standpoint, like from that first meeting, we don't want to proceed with that relationship until we've made the personal connection with that. And then we start on with the first deliverable that we start filling it out. And we call it the discovery meeting, but in our first meeting.
Great.
I,
And then, and
I love
Stacey,
that.
how do you tackle that empathy thing? I think you said there's 15 advisors
Yeah.
at Morton.
Mhm.
And so, and that's, is that something that becomes front and center when you think about marketing? Like, how do you make sure that the advisors themselves can bring that connectivity to it? How do you approach that?
So a few years ago, we brought in a coach. She was from the Admired Leadership Program. If you're not familiar with the Admired Leadership Program, they're online modules that teach you how to have good relationships with your team as a leader. They're very, very good training, actually. Well, the second part of their program, actually, they branched out and said, now let's teach advisors how to have the best relationships with clients. So it's not just about leaders having relationships with their people, but advisors having relationships with their clients. And they said it's actually the same exact thing. And in this training that we did with them, they told us that like a good relationship is defined by knowing four things. So the four things that you would know about somebody that you have a good relationship with, and maybe just think about your best friend right now. Do you know the people that are or pets that are most important to them? Do you know their hobbies, their skills, their talents? Do you know the moments that have defined them, like how their life has changed over time? And then the last one is, do you know their special geography, the place that they travel to or go to where they just feel best? And so 4 years ago, when we did this training, what we did is each advisor created a spreadsheet with these four columns and all of their clients. And over the last few years, we've been filling them out. And the goal is like, how can you know more about your client? Not just the services you provide, investment management, financial planning, but these four areas of the relationship. And so the way that we've done that is we call it meals over meetings. So starting about 3 years ago, we canceled client meetings, like said that we're not going to go on a set schedule unless a client asks. And instead, I want you to have a touch point or a meal with a client every few months, like some type of a way for you to like stay connected in their lives. This is actually, by the way, the same strategy I talked about earlier, the frequency of touch when it came to like social media and networking. Now we're doing it with clients. So basically, however like much you can touch your clients, the better, because if you're in front of them, they're more likely to give you a referral. And what we saw is of our new growth, Our client referrals went from 30% of new growth to 60% over the last 3 years. And a lot of it was because these meals over meetings, where every time you want to have a meeting, I want you to have a meal with the client instead. And so that's been hugely successful for us. We get a lot of referrals, honestly, after advisors go to lunch with the client, because you talk about these other things in their life. You actually get to know them and you know more about what's happening. And it's just like any one of our like family members. If you only see your family member on Thanksgiving, you don't know anything about them. But if you talk to them once a month, then you tend to know a lot more. And so I will tell you that for a lot of our advisors, they actually are at monthly touch points now with their clients to stay in front of them, which I think is also combating some of like the attention span issue, because sometimes clients will email us and be like, I haven't heard from you in a while. And I was like, that was 3 weeks ago that we had a phone call. And so clients are starting to, perceive that we're not on it as much. We've just found that they don't really miss the meetings. We might send them like a video once a quarter, like a 5-minute video overviewing their portfolio. Maybe the next quarter we send them a recommendation to a restaurant we think that they'd like. Maybe then, like we kind of do these little touch points. And I don't think it's more time than meetings were, but I think it's more effective. And so that's kind of how we've adjusted to make sure that our advisors are leading with that like empathy and relationship first.
Well, the two of you have been really great, and I think we're getting toward the end here of our episode. So one more substantive question before we get to, if you watch these in the past, you'll know that the last thing I like to ask you all to do is provide your parting shot. So before we get to that last question, I'm going to ask you this one. It's a little more maybe practical advice for other marketers listening or watching at home in terms of what are some ideas you'd offer for successfully building a marketing team within your organization? And I know each of you have people that work alongside you at your firms. Or if you prefer talking about how do you make good use of agency partners. They're both very relevant in terms of expanding what a CMO can do. And you don't have to tackle both sides of that, but if you have an idea or wisdom on either front, feel free to share. And Stacey, I'll go to you first on this one, since Matt got the first stab at the last one.
Yeah, I think on the marketing team front, we have a 5-person team. One basically full-time equivalent is just dedicated to those advisor brands, which I think it actually turns out to be very good ROI in terms of the growth we see from them. So that's one part of it. But we also have a full-time designer, my director of marketing, and then we have essentially 3 outsourced consultants. One's more in-house than not, focusing on AEO, SEO, and then PR we outsource, and then we have an outsourced design agency in Sydney, Australia. So all of these people together make a pretty big team for our size RIA. We're about 4 billion. We feel like there's never like a slowing of work because we also run 2 podcasts, which actually one full-time person does that too. So the combination of all of that, I think, has been significant, but the growth is there to justify it. And so as firms are making these decisions on who's the right team to hire, I think that probably more is better. One of the like redirects I would suggest making for people is like, if you were going to spend $100,000 in ads, how much would you expect to get in return for that $100,000 in ads? I don't know the answer to that. Maybe you know the answer, Matt, or what you think of for that. But if you could get $100,000 in revenue out of $100,000 ad spend, that would be amazing because it's recurring revenue, right? When we think about our advisor brands, if I spend $100,000 on human capital time, like the cost to my team, I think I'm getting at least 1 extra client per advisor, which is about $200,000 in recurring revenue. So as you're building a team, I think human capital costs can't just be seen as the same as it is on like the regular P&L for the advisory side of the business. I think in the marketing side, human capital cost needs to be almost like something that you're measuring ROI against, like you would ad spend or event spend, something like that.
That's interesting perspective. And I think, I love the fact that you're equating to what do you expect to get out of it, right? And I think it's really important a lot of times because you think about someone committing, $40,000 or $50,000, whatever the entry level salary is in a certain market for a marketing role. You're not going to expect that person to deliver a lot. So it doesn't feel like a heavy investment. But just the same, knowing full well that, hey, if you're going to sink $200,000 into a couple marketing hires you probably can expect some sort of higher level return. And I think it's a logical way of looking at it, Stacey. Matt, how would you answer that question in terms of making sure you either have a sharp uh, team or you're at least maximizing your external agency resources? What advice would you have?
Yeah, I would, and thank you, Stacey, for the breakdown too, because we actually have a similar size team. Ours is a little different because we also have like an internal agency team that supports some of our advisors on our entrepreneurity, but very similar roles. And we also have two podcasts with a podcast manager. So it was kind of funny to hear your breakdown there. So very similar in size. Joe, to answer though, I was a believer when we built this team because when I came to Prosperity 7.5 years ago, they actually used to outsource marketing before we came in. So we were building from scratch back then. And I looked at it first of like need. So like we didn't have anyone to do graphic design, video editing, things like that. So we knew we had to have that. Beyond that, as we've grown, it's also filling in gaps. What are the areas that I know are not strengths of mine or anyone else on the team where it's okay, this is where we know we need to fill in strengths on the team as you're building out internally. But I would argue the same thing works for the outsourcing to an agency side. When you're outsourcing to a PR agency, if that's not a strength of anyone at the firm, make sure that you're getting the best out of that because there is immense potential and obviously what you can get out of a PR firm that you're looking to outsource to, especially if, and I won't go into too much detail because we're running short on time, but look into the impacts of that PR can have on your AEO strategy. And what that can do for you on that side. It's not just what you're doing on your website like SEO. So look into the implications on that. From a marketing agency standpoint, obviously make sure you're filling the gaps on what you need, from a deliverable standpoint. If you're in a CMO or a higher level marketing position, check with your higher ups, the rest of your leadership team, your CEO, the rest of your leadership team. What expectations do they have? It's smart to go to them and say, what are they looking for? What expectations do they have out of marketing and sales or marketing business development? And make sure that you are checking all the boxes to say, hey, we can accomplish all of that so that when you're crafting the job descriptions or the recs, the prereqs for going out and hiring that you're making sure that you've got all of that covered.
Well, that's great advice for our listeners. And I think one of the things that I would say, on that advice point would be as an agency partner, you talk about maximizing relationships. I think it's great to have the mutual accountability and the times where we feel like we haven't gone off to a good start or we haven't clicked on a client alignment usually comes down to making sure that everybody knows what their end of the bargain is, right? So, and that goes in for internal roles as well. And sometimes you have firms will hire 3 or 4 people and they're overlapping roles and you end up having some confusion. Well, I'm a part-time designer and part-time podcast editor, but really what's my priority? And so that role definition and then mutual accountability with external partners goes a long way. And I think if you have that and understand, okay, who has to show up for what, where the deliverables stand, I think you have to treat that process like anything else because just because you have an investment in internal talent or external talent doesn't necessarily mean that you can just assume everyone is in lockstep unless you make a point of doing that. So great advice. I love it. This is a time of all our episodes where each of you gets a chance to deliver your parting shot. Words of wisdom, a prediction, a bit of outlook, something quick for our audience to take away as we wrap up the episode. And Matt, I'm going to put you on the spot first. Do you have a parting shot for us?
Yeah, you or someone from your team had asked beforehand kind of that marketing cliche that kind of stuck with me. And I did kind of want to deliver that of to the listeners, viewers, that perfection is the enemy of progress. And because I think that's something that I remind myself, I remind my team that don't let that get in the way of keeping things moving, especially in marketing. And we've talked about that multiple times today. We have to be innovating. We are in an R&D space. If we're afraid of moving things forward, if we're waiting for perfection, we're not going to be moving things forward. We can't be afraid to fail. I tell my team all the time, think of fail as an acronym, first attempt in learning. As long as you're learning from it, you didn't fail. So just fail fast, learn from it, try again, and let's keep moving forward. And so that's what I'd express is use marketing and business development as a way to innovate, and let's keep pushing the marketing industry forward, and let's keep moving this industry forward.
Awesome. And Stacey, your parting shot.
I'm going to piggyback on what you just said, Matt. I don't know if you've read the book Brave New Work, but in that book, it talks about how any person in leadership should not say whether things are going to work or not. They should measure everything as to whether or not it's safe to try. So is it safe to try a podcast? Is it safe to try this ad campaign? And I think that mentality, and by the way, that book is a very good recommendation for how to run a firm on the COO side, Brave New Work. It's such a good mentality to have, right? Because then you're not stopping yourself before you start. You're just saying, is this safe to try? And let's see how it goes. And I think that that's the perfect marketing mindset to go into anything in.
All right, awesome. We got to leave it here. Stacey McKinnon from Morton Wealth, Matt Seitz from Prosperity Capital. The two of you are awesome CMOs, people to look up to as those that are learning to find their way in the marketing landscape, the RIA landscape. So, hey, listen, you were great. Thanks so much. Appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you out on the conference circuit.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to Marketing Matchup, a production of Gregory. If you like what you heard, please listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.